Hi, I'm Diane, your host of Epic Conversations. And today we have a special guest, Jon Gemelke. Jon grew up in Arizona and California. He owns his own remodeling company, and as well as 2 commercial buildings. And you know, Jon is a real entrepreneur. He started his own ministry called Sock It To 'Em. Actually, he distributes socks to the homeless people. So I am so glad that you can watch this episode. And here's a good question. How does someone go from living on the streets in a life of drugs to a success and being happy? And by the way, he is happily married. And he has 3 children and lives in Colorado. So thanks for joining us, and you'll enjoy this story. Jon, we want to hear about your testimony, because you don't go from living on the streets to where you are today without some supernatural help.
Amen. Amen.
So let's hear about your story.
Where would you like me to start?
Okay, I want you to start where you told me about when you were 14 years old.
So
we're going way back here.
So my parents got divorced when I was just before I was about 13. And then I hit the streets at 14. My mom told me she couldn't send me to high school because she couldn't afford to buy me clothes or books. And so she told me school wasn't an option. And so then I went and walked on a construction site that was across from the high school that I would have gone to, and asked for a job. And I started working there, doing construction, kind of just picking up nails and sweeping and learning. And then, of course, I was kind of a restless kid. So then I was in Phoenix at that time, and then I ended up hitchhiking to Hollywood, California, which seems like if you're in Arizona, you're like, oh, Hollywood is not very far away. So I ended up in Hollywood, on the streets of Hollywood, and I just did whatever I wanted to do. 14 years old, I ran the streets, and then I hitchhiked across the country a lot. Ended up staying, but always going back to California. I stayed in California probably until I was in my 20s. Running the streets of California.
When you say running the streets, maybe people who've grown up on the streets, so what do you mean by running the streets?
Running the streets is just, drugs is a large part of it. You get into the drug culture, and you're just kind of one of the street kids that's around.
So how do you eat, live? I mean,
there's food in dumpsters. There's food in restaurants. You can always hustle money. You always have money in your pocket. Sell some drugs. Do whatever. Yeah.
Okay. So you hooked up with the street crowd.
I did hook up the street crowd. Yeah, I did. Then I lived in I ended up meeting some people. So I ran Hollywood. I ran Long Beach, and then I ended up down in San Diego. And in San Diego, there's a big park called Balboa Park, a really big park. And I ended up meeting some people there from a commune. And I ended up joining a commune in Southern California.
What's a commune like?
A commune, well, people think it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but it wasn't. It was an organic lifestyle. Definitely dust is us and we are dust kind of things. They're into evolution, things like that. And that was the first time I ever saw a garden. You realize that was the first time that I ever realized that food came from the ground. I always thought food just came from the store. I never really put it together that food was actually grown by people. Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. Yeah, as a young 20-something kid, you're like, what? Food grows in the ground? Oh, okay. I never really put it together as a city boy.
Isn't that something? Yeah. Wow. So how long were you in the commune? And
off and on, I was in a commune for about 13 years.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Did everybody pitch in, cook, and clean? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you had a house at that, or a place to live with a roof.
A place to live, a community. I think as a kid, it's interesting, I always wanted a place, people that would love me and accept me, and I always figured I envisioned that I would marry a farmer's daughter and I would just live on the farm and live happily ever after. Of course, that never happened. So anyway, we moved a few times. remember we moved the whole commune. There was about 70 of us, and
70, wow.
we were somewhat self-sufficient. We ate all organic and healthy. Then we moved to Texas.
Now, were you doing drugs at this time?
Every once in a while we partied. We got clean. We quit smoking. We quit because we realized it wasn't a healthy lifestyle.
Oh, okay.
But people would sneak off and get high anyway. So yeah.
So what happened after the commune?
So, well, let's see. So I left at one time. I left and went up to Minnesota, and I met a woman there, and I started a little remodeling company up there. I was doing some roofing and construction, and I met a woman and was engaged to be married, and she got pregnant, and I had my first daughter, who is Valerie. She's 27. She'll be 28 coming up soon.
Okay.
But anyway, I was pretty restless then. I was drinking a lot, and I did the same thing to her that happened to me. I kind of just abandoned her, left her with her mom, and disappeared. And then I went back to the commune for a short time, and then ended up in Texas, had a remodeling company there. And I remember her mom was looking for me and had found that I was in Texas and came down looking for me. And I remember she said that when she showed up at the house that I was staying at, they're like, we haven't seen him in 6 months. We just figured he's dead someplace. Because I was really into my addiction then, like heavily into drugs, and I was going off the deep end. I've lost 2 companies to my drug addiction over the years. You know, 2 full-fledged. Yeah, it's a bad thing. I've always worked, but I've always had an addiction too.
What do you think draws people to that addiction?
Escape. For me, it was escape. Yeah, I was just trying to numb out. The more, as long as you're high, you don't think about the reality of life. You don't think about all the things, what people would say trauma. We didn't run the therapist. Our therapist was just getting high. That was our therapy.
That was
our escape. Yeah.
Because there's pain, right? Usually.
Yeah, there's a lot of pain. I went through 6 years of psychotherapy, group counseling, and I remember figuring out, and I was somewhat straight at that time, not doing drugs, and I found out that that's what it was. They're like, well, you have women issues. I'm like, yeah, you think? Because I had abandonment issues, right? And so I think it's because, you know, you get abandoned as a kid, you get told certain and then you're like, all right, well, nobody really loves me. So then you're on the streets. And so I remember girls would tell me that they liked me or that they loved me. I'm like, no, you don't. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm not lovable. You can't love me. Like, it's just not true. You're just lying just like everybody else is.
So you believed that lie,
I did believe
that you
lie.
weren't lovable.
Yes.
Because
many,
of
many
all
years.
the rejection and abandonment before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then what happened?
So then what happened? Let's see. So I remember when I was in Texas, I had a remodeling company then. It was in the, I want to say it was the late 90s, early 2000s. It was when Michael Dell was, Dell Computers, and Michael Dell, and I actually worked on Michael Dell's property, did a deck, and we actually did a running track for his wife. Anyway, I remember being in that whole group, and I was doing decks and screen porches, because they have bugs there. They don't have bugs here, but anyway, they have bugs there. So I was doing screen porches and doing pretty good, maintaining my addiction and a job, if that makes any sense.
Oh,
But then your addiction gets the best of you.
Yes,
Eventually, because then you're like, nah, I'm not going to go to work today. I'm just going to get high for 4 or 5 days. But anyway, I remember a friend of mine's sisters would come out and visit him, and I got to know them a little. I can't remember their names now.
That's okay.
But anyway, they would come and visit, and they said, look, if they were Christians, and they were from Alabama, and they said, if you ever want a place to go and get straight, you just get a hold of us. And I always remember that, but I laughed at them too. Because I thought, these girls are just full of it. You know, these Christian girls, they're wimpy, they're weak, and no, can't do that. Well, then I got an urge, and I called them and I said, I wonder if this is true. And so I went to Alabama, and they actually put me up in a trailer on their property, and I got clean, and I actually went to a truck driving school.
Oh, yes.
And I drove truck I graduated at the top of my class. And number 1, and I got hired right away by Covenant Transport, which is out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, not knowing it was a Christian company, Covenant Transport.
Oh.
Anyway, and I was not a believer then. I still wasn't buying all that. Anyway, and so I drove truck for a while, and I stayed clean for a while, but then I started getting high again. I went down through Houston, Texas, where I used to get drugs.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, I'll just stop. And then I started getting high, and I was driving high.
So
And I thought, this is not healthy because I might kill somebody.
that's a good thought.
Yeah, and I didn't want to take anybody else out. I didn't care if I was taken out, but I didn't want to involve anybody else. So then I gave everything away. I had a car, I had clothes. I was kind of just staying with friends because I was in a truck. I left my truck sitting in the middle of a field. It has a GPS on it, and so Covenant knew where it was, so they went and got it. And I gave everything away. And then
Why did you give everything away?
I'm going to tell you. I'm giving it. So then I thought, so after I feel like I messed up because I had a chance to get clean. And I was clean for about 12 months, and then the last 6 months of driving I wasn't clean. And I thought, I can't do it. So I tried to commit suicide. I bought a bag of drugs and a bag of needles and holed up into a motel room, and I overdosed 6 times in 3 days. But I kept coming back too. And I was in pain. I remember my chest was just aching with pain because of the heart just wanting to burst out from the adrenaline from the drugs. And I remember just being in so much pain. And then I'd just wait a little bit, and I'd be like, all right, maybe the next shot will get me. And it didn't. And so I thought about jumping off a bridge in front of a truck. But then again, I would include somebody else, and I didn't want to mess somebody else's life up. So then I said, all right, I can't even do this. Fine, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't even commit suicide. I can't even do that right. So then I had an atlas. Had 2 bags of clothes, $1,600, and an atlas. And so I picked a spot, and it said Colorado Springs, Colorado. I'd only driven through Colorado Springs one time when I was driving truck. So I'd never been here, just drove through. And so I bought a one-way bus ticket from Columbus, Georgia to Colorado Springs, Colorado. And threw my phone away on the way. And so I had 0, and many times I just started at 0 where I just go to different places many times because I just figured I can make it. So
I can do it, right?
Yeah, it was I, now it's we and me, and it's us. So anyway, the bus got off down on South Nevada off I-25, and it went by the Chateau Motel. For some reason, the Chateau caught me, so I walked back to the Chateau. That's when the bus station was downtown on Weber. And so I walked back down to the Chateau, and it was at the beginning of the Iraqi War. I got to see the first bombs go off that night.
Oh.
So anyway, and I gave him money, $450. They wanted $750 for the month. I said, I'll give you $450 cash. He'd be like, okay. And so he took it. So I got into that motel, and I didn't know what to do because I didn't know anybody here. Nobody. So
I threw your phone away.
I threw my phone away, so I had no context, which is fine with me. So then I started walking around a little bit, and there was a young lady there named Deborah, and she was a prostitute, and she worked out of that motel. And she was very nice, and she would talk to me, and I would talk to her, but of course that was it. It's not my style. But anyway, Deborah came up to me after about 2 or 3 weeks, and she said, you know what? She said, I want to take you out to dinner. And I said, a date? She goes, no, let me take you out to dinner. And she was super friendly. She was really nice and pretty. And I thought, all right, I'll go out to dinner with you. She took me to the Springs Rescue Mission for dinner, which was just a couple of blocks away from this. And so I think she had it, and when we got over there, we were eating dinner. She said, you know, they have a men's program here. And I said, really? And so Deborah was a believer, but Deborah had an addiction. She had a heroin addiction, and she was a junkie. And I think Deborah said, I have an addiction. I love Jesus, and I hope he just forgives me. And so she brought me over to the mission, and then I did not join the mission program at that time. But a couple of weeks later, I found myself staring up at the cross in that building. And so April 5th of 2003, I went over to the mission and asked if I could join the men's program. And I did. And then I gave my heart to Jesus that day. I don't think I really did. I said the words and said the actions, but it wasn't really real. Because I did go out after about 6 weeks of being there. I went back out on the streets and got high again. And then I got stuck out in the woods out towards Fountain. And I was out there for 4 days. And on the 5th day, I said, Father, I prayed. I said, if you get me out of here, I promise you I'll never do drugs again. So I found my way back into the Springs. I found Deborah, and Deborah was livid.
Uh-oh.
She was so mad at me. And she said, the streets are not for you anymore. Okay. She said, it is your time to get off the streets. And I said, what about you? And she said, I cannot kick this addiction. She said, I just hope he forgives me. So I went back into the mission program. They accepted me back in, and I've been clean July 4th weekend of 2003. And I've been clean since.
Wow.
I feel like that's my real probably time that I really gave my heart and everything to God. Was then.
Second time.
Yeah.
What really changed inside that second time?
I think I saw that he was true and he got me out of the woods and he took care of me. Like when I said that and I said, all right, he got me out. I asked him to get me out of here and I promised him I would stay clean.
And interesting that Deborah had those words, the streets aren't for you. And it was like a prophetic word from God right through another human being.
Well, then you read the Bible later and you see how God used prostitutes, right? And, and I'm like, really? Like that happened to me? It's like I've got goosebumps right now.
I know.
Yeah, it was real humbling and real honoring. Yeah.
God had his hand on your life.
Yes.
And you accepted him as Lord and Savior through the Springs Rescue Mission.
Yes. I stayed for the Springs Rescue Mission, a 1-year program. I stayed for 20 months. I was one of their first interns because I realized that a year I wasn't ready to go yet.
That's a good point.
I was building my church family. I had some church relationships, great home church, and I had really good teachers at the mission, guys that really loved on me. Gals too, good. Some of the women there too were really, it was just, but I wasn't ready to leave. So at 20 months I was ready to leave.
That's interesting. So we're going to take a break here.
Okay.
Okay, and we want to hear the rest of the story. But this is awesome, Jon, how God has just woven all the way through your whole life. But the interesting thing you brought out twice that I noticed was you didn't want to hurt anybody else. You didn't care if but you don't want to kill anybody else in the process.
Right, or emotionally damage them.
Yeah, so something had always, it's like somebody had to have been praying for you or something. Because you had this, it's like you knew deep down.
So my wife told me, interesting story, we were just talking about that this morning. When my wife was 14 or 15 years old, she had been praying for her future husband's salvation. She said when she prayed, she never saw a face, but she said she always had prayed for their salvation. Oh. And she prayed that for years so I was that person that was benefiting from her prayers.
See? The power of prayer.
And I'm 10 years older than her. So I was 24 and 25 when she started praying for her husband. She was 14 and 15. And she prayed for years for her husband. Yeah.
That's another testimony.
For the salvation, she said.
For the salvation.
For the salvation of her husband.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
See, there's an unseen world that we can't see, and it is working, and that can give people hope.
Amen.
So thank you for sharing.
Yes, ma'am.
And we'll be back.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to this awesome testimony, and there's more. I mean, you just don't go like this and realize that there are unseen forces that are going on behind that care about you, that love you, and that want you clean, so to speak, and that want you to have a relationship with the Lord. There's people all around. Open your heart to receive that. And we will be back. And thank you so much for joining us. And in the meantime, have an epic day in the Lord. Hi, I'm Diane Grubus, and I've started a ministry, and I want to bless you. I'm so excited about it. DianeRubis.com. Go to the website and check out all the wonderful things that we have in store for you. We have some great epic conversations with some powerful guests and some teachings, free downloads. And we would love to have you join us, love to have you partner with us. We appreciate you and we want to hear from you. So check out the website and thank you.